Hey Ryan, a little movie opens this week.
Yeah,
On Hulu.
yes,
Not
which we don't talk about it nearly as much as I would like to be honest. It feels like we give a lot of love to some streaming services, and there's others out there that are worth looking at. And this week's release, I think, is one of those films that if you have the Disney bundle,
Yep.
which probably a lot of you do, this is something that you can pop over onto Hulu to watch. We're going to talk about the Boston Strangler.
Yes. Keira Knightley, Carrie Coon, Chris Cooper, David Dastmalchian, which is just a great name to say. I say that all day. Rory Cochrane. I mean, this is an arty film, not an arty film. This is like, I don't know, Spotlight meets She Said meets Zodiac.
Sure.
But it's about the two female reporters, mostly one of them, Loretta McLaughlin and Jean Cole, who worked at this Boston paper when they realized that some murders of women were connected, and the police hadn't made that connection. And so it's the story of them trying to get authorities to acknowledge that there is in fact a serial killer.
Sure.
And actually do their jobs. So the story is ostensibly about the search for the strangler, but really it's almost this kind of weird indictment of the system at the time. Of
at least two systems, both the news journalism,
Yep.
the way journalism worked, and the way that a detective police work also worked.
Yep.
And I think this is something that there once upon a time we didn't try to understand why killers and things did what they did. They were just horrific people and whatnot. This film goes into some true crime stuff that I think will fascinate a lot of people. Because the women being women and recognizing things that were happening, so the victims had a completely different take on what the police should be looking for than what the police did, because they're men. And while that may seem, I don't know,
It's simplistic now.
Simplistic, but the case, there are things that men will see in a situation that women won't, and vice versa. And I think that this film does a really good job of exploring, that, while also incorporating, again, this true crime story, that is really quite fascinating. And the fact that this is told really from kind of a journalistic perspective, it gives you kind of insight to how these stories are written and researched and things. So there's a lot going on in this film. It's got a great cast. It's got great performances. It's got a pretty good script. I think it's a little formulaic at times, but it's kind of also, you kind of have to give the people what they want to a certain degree.
There are certain things that have to happen.
It kind of falls into that, but I think this gives some context to the Boston Strangler that I didn't have. Some of those surrounding elements. There's been a few documentaries that have come out recently about other serial killers and things that in very similar circumstances, where you had, men working on cases who made assumptions that then later women were able to say, well, you can't make that assumption.
Nope.
It can play out differently, and then suddenly the whole thing opens up. And anyway, I thought it was a fascinating film. I don't do true crime as much as I used to, simply because the world's been pretty horrible,
right,
for the past couple of years, and working in news, I get my fill of that sort of stuff. But this film, because it is about being journalists as well as being a true crime thriller sort of thing, to me, it was, I don't know if the word's enjoyable. Sure. Enjoyable. It was enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, well, and it is. 'Cause, I mean, it's not like it's a slasher film.
No.
You see some pictures, but there's nothing really graphic in here. you understand the horror of the situations, but again, it's not necessarily a violent film.
No.
It's about the violence, but it's not about the violence. And there's a difference. But no, I think it's cool. And some people might be like, oh, and again, I hate the fact that I understand how the wider internet criticism works. And I watch it, and we touched on it, women see things differently in this than men do in certain situations. And in this film, this was the 60s, so again, women in newsrooms were writing, toaster reviews, which really happens in this film. Or, they were covering the society. They weren't handling hard news. You didn't question the police. The men would, they were very hesitant to accept a woman's word without, can you prove this? Before we do this or that or the other thing. So some people out there might be inclined to say, oh, the woman they're not always right in this film. The women make assumptions in this film that turn out to be wrong.
Yeah. Well, but I think what it does reinforces this idea that for if you're looking for balanced whatever, you do need to have more than one perspective. Well, I think we'd all agree that, different people bring different things, different backgrounds bring different things. So obviously different genders, they're going to, there's certain things that women will notice about women or about, certain circumstances that men just would look past.
Yes. Oh, and absolutely. I mean, and a guy that's raised in this city will not notice things in a small town that the small town person might not notice in a city because of backgrounds and, class and income and race and all that stuff. It does all play in to a thing. My point is that this is not a quote unquote woman power movie. I mean, it kind of is, but it's not, the women are not superheroes in this, but all the men aren't complete dicks either.
No, they're not, and it just and some are.
Everyone is a dick occasionally. It's a thing. We all have that in us. But no, it's a nice balance. It's a good script. It's a good balanced script that looks at the events. It looks at how policing was done. It looks at how reporting was done. It looks at the documentation of the time because there's been lots of documentation on the Boston Strangler case. And it's just a really solid, interesting look at, what does it take to find someone that does this? Because that's a question mark. Everyone is tangentially aware. Everyone understands, oh yes, the Boston Strangler, but you learned things in this film that you might not know about that whole situation.
And it's far more complicated, I think, than I mean, there's some complexities to this story that are unique or maybe not unique.
Right.
I mean, that's entirely possible, and that's terrifying as well.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's just
there are aspects of this story that are really interesting and a little terrifying, and this is all based on, this isn't somebody's imagination. This is all based on actual stuff. And some of this is things that we talk about in the news now. I'm not going to dive into what those are because I kind of would reveal the ending, but there are subjects and things that pop up in this that are things that we talk about now as possibilities. But this film suggests no, they're not possibilities. They're things that have happened.
Yep.
That these aren't just strange things that newscasters and crime experts talk about. That there's some basis for some of the stuff that they I don't know what that every time there is a serial killer or there is a group of killings, there's always questions that ask, and part of the reason is because in a story like this, a lot of those questions weren't asked. It turned out to be
important questions to ask.
Yes. Yeah. Well, or to be rather considered, or it's hard to talk about without kind of, but this film is just interesting. the story itself is fundamentally interesting, and they've got a nice cast to tell it. And for me, that equates to, if you're at home and you're on the couch and you've got a couple hours, this is a good way to spend it.
But hey, look, if you enjoy what you're seeing and hearing on the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast, why not take a second to click subscribe if you're on YouTube, click follow wherever you're listening to us. Follow us on Twitter at VS Movie Podcast. Same over on Facebook. If you're on Instagram, it's Visually Stunning Movie Podcast. That would be awesome for us. We appreciate you listening. And now let's get back to the show. Oh yeah, and let's talk about. I mean, this might be my favorite Keira Knightley performance. She's really good. I mean, she's really good. And Carrie Coon, I have them both on my to watch list, or don't forget about them by the end of the year for next year's awards. I think the picture is strong enough right now. It's on my don't forget about this movie list. So it's interesting in that it's come out this early, and it's on Hulu.
Well, and I think that this speaks to the future of independent cinema to a certain extent, because this film, 5 years ago, it plays in theaters.
Oh yeah,
and gets, it may only be quote unquote art house theaters, or art house theaters and limited screenings at major theaters and whatnot.
Yeah.
Not a massive release by any stretch of the imagination, but it would have been marketed differently. It would have been shown differently.
Oh yeah.
So it's hard to know. Is this now? Is Hulu? Is Netflix? Is Apple TV Plus? Whatever. Is that where art house films are going to be? And if so, what is that? What happens to art house cinemas and the traditions and et cetera, and it's a bigger issue. But no, this probably would have been a film that would have a completely different strategy 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Than what is happening now. And it will be interesting. Streaming services have had some good success in the past couple of years, in getting recognized, at awards and whatnot, but it undoubtedly has some sort of impact on the way the film is perceived by some people. And in theory, it should be able to reach more people, but does it is the question. I don't know if it does, because does it just get buried? And I think we're seeing studios slimming back what they're doing for streaming services, and I think that's the smartest decision, because there's just too much, and there are really quality films and series that are just getting ignored because there's so much other stuff to look at.
Yeah. If you have a film that you believe in, it can't go straight to streaming. It just can't. It's got to be some kind of push.
Unless you're Netflix and you have, but even Netflix puts stuff in theaters. That's the funniest thing about it is Netflix throughout the pandemic and the coming back and they were more supportive of theaters than the major studios were. They kind of saw theatrical, 1 or 2 week theatrical releases as a bonus.
Yeah.
Ultimately it was going to be on their service and that was where they're going to make money, but it was a bonus. But I think Boston Strangler, it probably needs more hype than it's getting. It needs to be noticed, and so I guess that's where we step in and say, hey folks, Boston Strangler, interesting film. You should go check it out. You have Hulu already, most likely.
Yep. And
go give it a watch.
Oh yeah. Go give it a watch. Absolutely. It's definitely worth it. Like I said, there's a lot of people that have the bundle. You might not get on Hulu for a lot, because it is more TV than a lot of the other services. But Coda was on Hulu, I believe.
Apple TV.
Was it Apple? Oh, man, that's terrible. One of the other ones was made it to Hulu too.
There's been a lot of Hulu, because that's where a lot of the 20th century, what would have been the Searchlight pictures,
right?
A lot of those things now, because I think there was a shift. A shift to pad. They were padding
Yeah.
that they were offering on these streaming services, and now they're starting to realize that may not have been the best idea. And I think this is one of those films that probably gets caught somewhere in the transition.
Yeah.
It probably should have had a theatrical release, at least a brief one,
Yep.
before. And I think that might be the new model. But I think a lot of these films deserve at least go out and test the waters, and you never know what's gonna come of it.
I know, it's weird. It's weird. You don't have to open it in 3,000 theaters on the first week, but give people a chance to see your film out there. But yeah, no, Boston Strangler, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I was expecting, and I was 100% okay with that. It just, like I said, I enjoyed it more than I thought it was a more compelling journalism movie than She Said, which we just had last year. Like I said,
Well, yes, and part of that is because She Said, in a lot of ways, was really not the journalist's story, and what they failed to do with that movie was to make the journalist aspect of that story as compelling as the victim. That movie was mostly interesting when you were talking to victims, and their stories were coming out and what they had to endure, and whereas this one, the experiences that these women are going through are maybe not as interesting as the murders that they're examining, but they're pretty darn interesting.
Yeah,
the characters themselves are really quite interesting in the way they're presented. And I'm not saying that the real people behind the She Said movement aren't interesting. It's just the way that it presented.
Right.
This film presents them in the journalists in a better way, I think, than that film did.
Yeah, cinematically, it's more appealing.
It's a better told story. They told it from the right. They got a lot of things right that maybe that other film didn't get right. And so, I mean, as a journalist, it's interesting, and as someone who's interested, at least somewhat in history and true crime factors into that. Yeah, I think it's got a little bit of everything for a lot of different people.
You'll check that out on Hulu right now. It is out today, so check it out. You'll probably enjoy it if you have any interest in the genre at all, or if you're just kind of a history buff in that sort of arena. So that is Boston Strangler, written and directed by Matt Ruskin, Keira Knightley, Carrie, Coon, Chris Cooper is their editor, I think. Chris Cooper's always good. It's just always good.
Even when he's kind of a backwards jerk, he's
Well, he was a product. It's a product of his time.
No, I was going to say, but he comes around.
No, in the end, he's a journalist.
Yes.
And at his heart, he's a journalist, and in the end, that's why he does the things he does, because he's a journalist. Damn it. And that's what's most important to me. Yeah, definitely check it out on Hulu. We've got lots of movies coming out over the next couple weeks. 2 huge ones that I will name drop now. John Wick 4 comes out next week. Dungeons and Dragons the week after that. But there are other movies that we're going to be watching between now and then. And there's good stuff. It's summer season is getting ready to ramp up, and I'm down for that. So, till next time, stay safe, be good, go see a good movie in theaters. They are there. Lots of good movies in theaters right now. Or if you want to stay home, on Hulu, Boston Strangler. So I have been Mark, your host. That is Ryan, your co-host. Bye, Ryan.